In parts of the deep ocean, scientists film animals that almost disappear. Light passes through their bodies as if they were made of water. Inside them, organs float in plain view. A tiny stomach contracts. Threads of nerves spread through the body. In some species, even the slow pulse of the heart can be seen through the skin. At first glance, the images can look unreal. Transparent shrimp, glass-like octopuses, drifting animals that resemble floating tubes of clear gel. Photos of these creatures often circulate online, mistaken for digital models or special effects, but they are real, and they appear again and again in deep-sea exploration. Animals separated by millions of years of evolution arrive at the same strange design. Crustaceans, jelly-like drifters, larval fish, and delicate colonies all share a similar feature. They almost vanish in the water around them. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet and forms the largest living environment on Earth. Yet most of this world lies in dim light or total darkness. A few hundred meters below the surface, sunlight begins to fade. Colors disappear, shadows soften. Farther down, bodies that stand out even slightly can reveal themselves from surprising distances. Many animals solve this problem with darker colors or protective armor. Others take a different path. They lose their pigments, their tissues thin, organs shift deeper inside the body. Over time, their outlines begin to fade. Instead of hiding behind rocks or shadows, these animals blend directly into the water itself. Some become so delicate that bringing them toward the surface causes their bodies to collapse before scientists can fully study them. Others are seen only through cameras drifting quietly through the depths, and the deeper researchers explore, the more often they encounter this same fragile design. Tonight, we explore the strange world of transparent life in the deep sea. Before we continue, I'm curious, are you listening to this while trying to fall asleep or just exploring some science tonight? Let me know in the comments. Now let's continue our story. Far above the open ocean, sunlight spreads freely across the moving surface. Waves scatter it into shifting patterns of brightness, and the upper layers glow with familiar daylight. Yet, with every meter downward, that brightness begins to thin. The water slowly filters the light, separating it into fragments until the clarity of the surface world fades into something quieter and more uncertain. Water absorbs light in a gradual and selective way. The first colors to disappear are the warm tones that dominate sunlight near the surface. Red fades quickly as depth increases, slipping away until it no longer exists within the surrounding water. By the time a diver or drifting animal reaches 200 meters below the surface, the ocean has already transformed the spectrum. Reds have vanished, oranges grow faint, and the remaining light becomes increasingly blue. This transformation does not happen all at once. It unfolds in layers, each one dimmer than the last. Shadows stretch longer through the water, and outlines soften as brightness weakens. Shapes remain visible, yet the contrast that once defined them begins to dissolve. The ocean at these depths still contains light, but it feels distant, as though the sun itself has retreated far above. Between roughly 200 and 1,000 meters lies a vast region known to oceanographers as the mesopelagic zone. Many scientists also refer to it as the twilight zone, a name that reflects the unusual balance between light and darkness found there. Sunlight still reaches these depths, but only as a faint glow filtered through hundreds of meters of water. In this dim environment, the rules of visibility begin to change. Animals drifting through the open water cannot rely on solid surfaces for cover. There are no reefs, rocks, or forests of kelp to hide behind. Instead, the only background available is the endless column of water itself, illuminated by the fading glow from above. For creatures living here, even the faintest silhouette can become visible. A body passing between an observer and the dim light above may appear as a shadow suspended in the water. The contrast may be subtle, yet in a place where survival depends on detecting movement at great distances, that slight difference can mean everything. As depth continues to increase, sunlight weakens even further. By 500 meters, the ocean has already absorbed nearly all colors except the deep blue wavelengths that travel farthest through water. The surrounding world takes on a muted tone, as though the entire environment has been washed in a single shade of dim blue. At 1,000 meters, sunlight no longer penetrates the ocean at all. The faint glow from the surface disappears completely, leaving behind a darkness that remains unchanged, whether it is midday or midnight above. This boundary marks the transition into a realm where the sun has no direct influence. Above that boundary, however, the twilight zone remains a place of delicate balance. Light still exists, but only barely. It spreads thinly through the water, creating a dim ceiling far overhead, while the depths below sink into darkness. Animals moving within this space live in a world defined by faint illumination and shifting shadows. Under these conditions, visibility becomes a complex challenge. Bodies that reflect light may stand out against the surrounding water, while solid forms can cast shadows that reveal their presence. Even movement alone can disturb the fragile brightness that filters down from the surface. Life in the twilight zone unfolds within this quiet tension between light and darkness. The environment offers just enough illumination for predators to notice silhouettes drifting above them, while prey must navigate a space where hiding behind physical shelter is almost impossible. Within this narrow band of fading sunlight, evolution begins shaping unusual solutions. The physics of light and water combine to create a landscape where remaining unseen becomes one of the most valuable advantages an animal can possess. Entries in the logbooks of early ocean voyages sometimes included small remarks that seemed almost uncertain, alongside notes about currents, temperatures, and depths. Observers occasionally described faint animals retrieved from the water. Their forms appeared so delicate that even careful sketches struggled to capture them. Bodies seemed unfinished, soft shapes barely separated from the surrounding seawater. Naturalists studying these specimens often hesitated when assigning them names. Some creatures resembled transparent bells or drifting ribbons, yet their outlines were difficult to define. When preserved in containers, many gradually lost what little structure they possessed. Within hours, they could dissolve into shapeless fragments, leaving behind only a suggestion that a living organism had once existed. During the 19th century, deep-sea exploration depended largely on weighted nets lowered far below the surface. These devices swept through darkness and returned with a mixture of sediments, fish, crustaceans, and occasionally stranger forms that seemed almost weightless. Among these collections were animals whose tissues carried almost no pigment at all. Their bodies allowed light to pass through them so easily that they nearly disappeared against glass jars filled with seawater. Researchers examining these specimens sometimes struggled to determine whether the materials represented intact animals or broken remains of larger organisms. Soft, gelatinous structures folded upon themselves. Transparent membranes clung to the sides of the containers, nearly invisible until gently stirred by movement in the water. On deck, sailors assisting with these collections occasionally mistook such forms for loose jelly drifting through the nets. Pieces were sometimes discarded without careful inspection, assumed to be fragments of damaged animals rather than organisms of their own. Only under patient observation did certain specimens reveal faint internal structures, delicate channels, or suspended organs that confirmed their identity as living creatures. The difficulty of observing them did not end once they were recognized. In their natural environment, these animals occupied a space where their bodies blended almost perfectly with the surrounding water. Without solid color or firm edges, they reflected little light. From a short distance away, they appeared indistinguishable from the water itself. As scientific expeditions continued through the 20th century, the limitations of nets became increasingly clear. Instruments capable of measuring temperature and pressure improved steadily, yet direct observation of deep water life remained rare. Scientists understood that the ocean held far more species than their equipment could reveal, especially in regions where fragile animals disintegrated during collection. The first glimpses of these hidden communities began to appear when research submersibles descended into the ocean, carrying human observers. Through thick viewing windows, scientists watched the water drift past in the glow of their external lamps. Within those beams, shapes slowly emerged that earlier expeditions had rarely recorded. Delicate organisms moved through the illuminated water with unhurried motion. Some formed narrow chains stretching several meters in length. Others appeared as faint spheres or elongated cylinders, their bodies so transparent that only subtle distortions of light marked their presence. When the lamps shifted direction, internal organs momentarily became visible, before fading again into near invisibility. Later, remotely operated vehicles expanded these observations even further. Equipped with stable cameras and steady lighting, these robotic explorers recorded long hours of footage in the quiet depths. The recordings revealed entire layers of drifting life that earlier generations of scientists had barely suspected. Within these videos, animals passed slowly through the field of view like faint currents given shape. Transparent bodies pulsed gently as they propelled themselves forward. Slender digestive tracts glowed faintly after feeding, suspended inside tissues that remained otherwise clear. Small eyes appeared briefly before vanishing again as their owners drifted beyond the light. Gradually, a pattern began to form within the growing archive of observations. The ocean contained not just a few scattered transparent organisms, but entire communities built around bodies that allowed light to pass almost unhindered. What once seemed like fragile curiosities collected in uncertain nets revealed themselves as inhabitants of a vast and quiet world that had remained hidden simply because it was so difficult to see. A pale shape sometimes appears in the deep, open ocean, moving with slow, deliberate motions through the still water. At first glance, it resembles a faint blur suspended in the blue darkness, barely distinguishable from the water surrounding it. Only when light passes directly through its body does the animal reveal its delicate structure, a small octopus whose tissues are almost entirely transparent. This animal has come to be known as the glass octopus, a name that reflects the unusual clarity of its body. Unlike most octopuses that live among rocks and coral on the seafloor, this species spends its life drifting through the vast midwater regions of the ocean. Far below the surface and far above the seabed, it inhabits a space where there are no solid boundaries, only open water stretching in every direction. Within that open environment, its body seems almost absent. The mantle, arms, and webbing that connect them allow light to pass through with remarkable ease. Only a few structures interrupt the transparency. Two dark eyes float near the front of the head, and a compact cluster of internal organs rests within the otherwise clear mantle. When illuminated carefully, these organs become briefly visible, suspended like small shapes inside a fragile sphere. The digestive system forms a faint curve within the body, while the optic nerves extend from the eyes toward the central brain. The rest of the animal remains so clear that the surrounding water seems to flow directly through its outline. The arms of the glass octopus stretch outward in slender lines, each one carrying rows of delicate suckers. Between the arms, a thin webbing forms a subtle umbrella shape that helps the animal glide through the water. Movements are slow and controlled. The octopus gently contracts its mantle, pushing water behind it in quiet pulses that carry it forward. Observations from deep ocean cameras show the animal drifting calmly through midwater layers, sometimes pausing as if suspended in stillness. In this environment, movement must remain careful. Any sudden motion could reveal the animal's position to nearby predators that search the dim water for silhouettes or reflections. Transparency provides a remarkable advantage in such a setting. When the glass octopus remains motionless, much of its body becomes difficult to detect from a distance. The clear tissues scatter very little light, allowing the animal to blend into the surrounding water column. Yet complete invisibility remains impossible. Certain structures must remain opaque in order to function. The eyes require pigment to detect faint light, and the digestive organs contain materials that cannot become transparent. These darker elements drift within the clear body, like tiny islands inside a nearly invisible sea. Scientists rarely encounter the glass octopus during exploration dives. Its habitat lies in the open midwater, a region that is difficult to study because it contains no physical landmarks to guide observation. Vehicles exploring the deep ocean often focus on the seafloor, where geological formations and biological communities gather in visible clusters. The midwater world offers no such reference points. Animals drift through an enormous three-dimensional space where encounters occur only by chance. As a result, sightings of the glass octopus remain uncommon, captured only occasionally by remotely operated vehicles moving quietly through the depths. When these encounters occur, the recordings reveal an animal that seems almost unreal in its delicacy. The body appears less like solid flesh and more like a transparent envelope holding a few essential structures in place. Arms extend outward with quiet grace, then fold gently as the octopus glides through the dim water. In this open ocean habitat, the glass octopus embodies a form of life shaped by the physics of light and water. Its nearly invisible body allows it to drift through a vast environment where remaining unseen can make the difference between survival and disappearance. At the beginning of a fish's life, the body often exists in a form that looks almost unreal in its delicacy. The newly hatched larva drifts quietly through the water, its shape so faint that only careful observation reveals its presence. From a distance, it can resemble a sliver of moving light, a tiny structure suspended within the vastness of the ocean. During this early stage, the tissues of many species remain almost completely transparent. The skin contains very little pigment, and the muscles are arranged in thin layers that allow light to pass through them with minimal obstruction. Seen under magnification, the larva appears like a living outline, a fragile organism whose interior structures remain fully visible. Inside this clear body, the earliest forms of the skeleton begin to emerge. At first, they appear as faint lines, tracing the length of the spine. These delicate supports develop gradually, strengthening the animal's body as it prepares for the more active life of a juvenile fish. Through the transparent tissues, each small segment of the forming vertebrae can sometimes be observed in remarkable detail. The internal organs remain suspended within the body like small components within a clear chamber. A slender digestive tract curves through the center of the larva, while the beating heart sends slow pulses of blood through vessels that branch outward toward the developing muscles. In certain species, the eyes grow quickly, dark spheres forming at the front of an otherwise transparent head. For these young fish, transparency serves an important role during the earliest and most vulnerable stage of life. The open water, where many larvae drift, offers little physical protection. Without rocks, plants, or solid surfaces for shelter, small animals must rely on other strategies to remain unnoticed within their surroundings. A nearly invisible body allows the larva to pass through the water with minimal visual contrast. When light travels through tissues that closely match the optical properties of seawater, the animal becomes difficult to distinguish from the environment around it. Predators scanning the water for moving shapes may overlook such delicate forms as they drift quietly in the current. At the same time, the larval fish continues to grow. Over days and weeks, subtle changes begin to transform its structure. The skeletal elements that once appeared as faint threads become stronger and more defined. Muscles thicken, preparing the young fish for more powerful swimming. As this development continues, the body slowly gains pigments that were absent during the earliest phase of life. Cells capable of producing color begin to appear within the skin. These chromatophores eventually create patterns and shading that characterize the adult form of the species. The transition from transparency to coloration happens gradually, often in stages that correspond with changes in behavior. As the fish becomes larger and more capable of active swimming, it may move toward habitats where camouflage relies on patterns rather than invisibility. The glass-like clarity that protected it during its smallest stage begins to fade. Marine biologists studying these early forms often observe them under gentle illumination, allowing the internal structures to remain visible without disturbing the fragile tissues. Under such conditions, the larval fish appears like a living diagram of its own anatomy. The heartbeat, the branching vessels, and the forming skeleton create a quiet display of development unfolding within transparent walls. Across countless species, this early phase repeats again and again throughout the ocean. Each larva begins its existence as a nearly invisible organism, drifting through the water with organs and bones suspended inside a body that allows light to pass almost unhindered. For a brief period in the life of many fish, the ocean holds small creatures that resemble fragments of living glass, carrying within them the future shapes of the adults they will become. Far from the seafloor and far from any shoreline, the open ocean sometimes carries long drifting structures that resemble delicate chains made of glass. These forms move slowly with the surrounding water, bending and stretching as currents pass through them. Each chain is alive, composed of dozens or sometimes hundreds of small gelatinous animals linked together in quiet procession. These organisms are known as salps, members of a group of marine animals called tunicates. Although they may resemble simple jelly-like bodies, salps belong to the same broad lineage as vertebrates. Their distant relatives include fishes and other animals with backbones, yet their own bodies have taken a very different path, becoming soft, transparent cylinders designed for life in open water. A single salp looks like a small hollow tube, its tissues so clear that the surrounding ocean seems to pass directly through its body. Along the interior runs a series of muscle bands arranged in delicate rings. When these muscles contract, the animal draws water into one end of the tube and pushes it out the other. This steady, pumping motion propels the salp gently forward while also drawing microscopic food particles into its body. When salps form chains, each individual remains connected to its neighbors, creating long, flexible structures that drift together through the water column. The members of the chain pulse rhythmically, sometimes in coordinated waves that travel along the length of the group. Seen from a distance, the chain appears like a strand of transparent beads slowly gliding through the ocean. The clarity of their bodies makes these chains surprisingly difficult to detect. In natural light, most of the salp's tissues allow light to pass through with minimal scattering. Only the faint outlines of muscle bands and the narrow digestive tract inside each individual reveal that living organisms occupy the space. Inside the tubular body of every salp, a fine mesh of mucus acts as a feeding net. As water passes through the animal during swimming, tiny plankton become trapped within this mesh. The collected particles are then transported toward the digestive tract, where they provide energy for growth and reproduction. Salps often appear in large numbers when ocean conditions allow plankton populations to increase. During these periods, entire swarms of chains may drift through the water, sometimes extending for many meters. Each individual remains small, yet the combined movement of many chains creates a quiet procession of life moving through the ocean's open spaces. The feeding activity of these animals plays an important role in the movement of carbon through marine ecosystems. By consuming plankton near the surface or in midwater, salps gather organic material that originated from microscopic plants and other drifting organisms. After digestion, some of this material becomes compact waste pellets that sink steadily toward deeper waters. These pellets travel downward through the ocean much faster than loose organic particles. As they descend, they carry carbon that once existed near the surface into deeper layers of the sea. This slow rain of sinking material contributes to a process often called the biological carbon pump, which gradually transfers carbon from surface ecosystems toward the depths. Through this process, creatures that appear almost weightless become participants in one of the ocean's large invisible cycles. The transparent chains, drifting quietly through the water, help move nutrients and carbon through vast vertical distances. Despite their delicate appearance, salps remain well suited to the open ocean environment. Their bodies contain large amounts of water, allowing them to maintain buoyancy while remaining nearly invisible to animals that rely on sight. The gentle pulses of their muscles propel them forward without creating strong disturbances in the surrounding water. Within the drifting chains, each individual continues its quiet rhythm of movement and feeding. Together, they form living structures that glide through the ocean like fragile strands of crystal, carrying within them the steady flow of life and matter moving through the deep sea. In the dim layers of the midwater ocean, a small fish moves slowly through the quiet darkness, its body shaped like a narrow silver vessel. At first glance, it appears ordinary compared with the delicate creatures drifting nearby. Yet a closer look reveals one of the most unusual anatomical designs found in the deep sea. The upper portion of the fish's head forms a smooth, transparent dome. Instead of scales or solid bone covering the skull, a clear shield of tissue arches over the front of the head like a curved window. Beneath this dome rest two large greenish eyes, structures unlike the forward-facing eyes of most fish. These eyes are elongated and cylindrical, pointing upward rather than forward. In their resting position, they face the faint light filtering from above, allowing the fish to watch for silhouettes drifting through the water column. From this vantage point, the eyes function like telescopes, gathering the smallest traces of light that pass through the deep ocean. The fish belongs to a group commonly known as barreleyes, a name inspired by the unusual shape of these upward-pointing eyes. Each eye is contained within the clear dome that protects the delicate sensory organs from the surrounding water. The dome itself remains nearly invisible, its surface allowing light to pass through with minimal distortion. For many years, scientists believed that the eyes of this fish remained fixed in place, permanently directed toward the water above. Early specimens collected in nets often showed the eyes frozen in that upward orientation. Only later did careful observation reveal that the eyes possess a remarkable ability to rotate within the head. Inside the transparent dome, the cylindrical eyes can pivot forward when necessary. This movement allows the fish to change its field of view, shifting from scanning the space above to examining objects directly in front of its mouth. Such flexibility provides an advantage in an environment where food may appear from multiple directions. When the fish glides quietly through the water, the upward-facing eyes search for faint shadows produced by drifting organisms overhead. Many small animals in the midwater environment travel above the barreleye's position, their bodies crossing the dim light that filters from distant layers closer to the surface. Once a potential meal comes within reach, the eyes rotate forward, aligning with the mouth as the fish moves to intercept its prey. This motion happens smoothly inside the transparent dome, the eyes turning like instruments within a clear chamber. The dome itself serves another important function. Certain drifting animals defend themselves with stinging cells, delicate structures capable of delivering painful toxins to predators. The protective shield over the barreleye's head likely helps guard its sensitive eyes while it navigates among such organisms. Despite its unusual appearance, the fish remains well adapted to the quiet world it inhabits. Its body is slender and reflective, reducing the contrast that might reveal its presence to nearby predators. The transparent dome above the head contributes little to the fish's visibility, blending softly with the surrounding water. Encounters with barreleye fish remained rare for much of scientific history. Specimens retrieved in nets often arrived damaged, their fragile domes collapsed during the journey to the surface. Only with the arrival of modern deep ocean cameras did researchers begin to observe the animal in its natural environment. Video recordings show the fish hovering calmly in the water, its fins making small adjustments that hold it nearly motionless. Within the clear dome, the eyes remain visible as pale green cylinders, sometimes tilting slowly as they adjust their direction. Through this unusual design, the barreleye fish carries a quiet adaptation shaped by the dim conditions of the deep ocean. The transparent dome above its head forms a window through which its remarkable eyes continue their silent search through the dark water. Among the drifting inhabitants of the midwater ocean are small crustaceans that move with sudden flicks of their tails, vanishing almost as quickly as they appear. Their bodies occupy the water like faint outlines rather than solid forms. Only when light passes directly across them does their presence become briefly clear. These animals belong to a variety of shrimp species, adapted for life far from the seafloor. Unlike the colorful shrimp that live among coral reefs or coastal habitats, many midwater relatives possess bodies that allow light to travel through them with surprising ease. Their outer shells contain little pigment, and the internal tissues beneath the shell remain almost entirely colorless. From a short distance away, the body of such a shrimp may disappear against the surrounding water. The long abdomen, slender legs, and delicate antennae blend quietly into the background. The only features that often remain visible are the eyes, which must contain dark pigments to detect light in the dim ocean environment. These eyes appear like small floating beads, sometimes giving the impression that a pair of dark spheres is drifting through otherwise empty water. When the shrimp changes direction or flexes its tail, a faint outline of the body briefly emerges, then fades again as the animal settles back into stillness. The transparent quality of these shrimp results from a combination of structural and biochemical traits. The chitin that forms their outer shell lacks the heavy pigmentation found in many shallow water crustaceans. Beneath this shell, the muscles that power their swimming remain arranged in thin layers that scatter little light. Inside the body, however, certain organs remain visible. The digestive tract, often appears as a pale tube running along the length of the abdomen. In some individuals, the stomach may darken temporarily after feeding, revealing the recent capture of plankton or other small organisms. The shrimp's circulatory system also contributes to its faint appearance. Many midwater species carry blood that lacks the strong coloration found in animals living closer to the surface. This reduced pigmentation allows internal fluids to remain nearly invisible as they move through the body. Such adaptations prove valuable in the vast open water where these shrimp spend their lives. Without rocks, plants, or other structures to conceal them, survival often depends on reducing the visual signals that predators might detect. A body that transmits light instead of reflecting it offers a quiet advantage in these conditions. Despite their fragile appearance, transparent shrimp remain active participants in midwater ecosystems. They swim through the ocean using rapid contractions of the abdomen, producing swift backward movements that carry them away from potential threats. Between these bursts of motion, they drift calmly, allowing currents to guide their position in the water column. Many species feed on tiny drifting organisms, capturing plankton with fine appendages that extend from the front of the body. These feeding structures sweep gently through the water, gathering particles that are then transferred toward the mouth. The process unfolds quietly, with little disturbance to the surrounding environment. Encounters with these shrimp often occur during deep ocean surveys, when research lights reveal sudden movements in the water nearby. For a moment, the transparent body becomes visible, illuminated by the passing beam. The eyes glint faintly, the abdomen flexes, and the shrimp slips away into the darkness once more. Within the immense spaces of the midwater ocean, such animals continue their subtle existence. Their nearly invisible bodies glide through the water with only small details revealing their presence. Eyes, organs, and delicate appendages drift within a form that otherwise seems to dissolve into the surrounding sea. In the quiet layers between the surface and the deep abyss, the ocean often appears empty at first glance. Water stretches in every direction with little sign of movement, as though the space itself contains almost nothing at all. Yet careful observation reveals a slow procession of fragile animals moving through this immense volume, creatures whose bodies resemble faint impressions rather than solid forms. Many of these inhabitants belong to groups known as gelatinous zooplankton. Their tissues contain extraordinary amounts of water, sometimes more than 95% of their total mass. The remaining material forms thin membranes and delicate structures that hold the body together while allowing light to pass through with little resistance. Among the most graceful of these organisms are the comb jellies, members of a group called catenniforms. Their bodies often resemble transparent ovals or elongated spheres drifting through the water column. Along the outer surface run rows of tiny hair-like structures known as cilia, arranged in bands that catch and bend the surrounding light. When these cilia beat in coordinated waves, they propel the animal forward with gentle precision. The movement is so smooth that the surrounding water barely stirs. The comb jelly glides silently through the ocean, its nearly invisible body carrying only faint hints of structure. Inside the clear tissues, a network of canals distributes nutrients throughout the animal. These channels form delicate branching patterns that may appear briefly when illuminated by a passing beam of light. In many species, slender tentacles extend outward from the body, trailing through the water to capture microscopic prey. Other gelatinous animals share similar forms of existence. Transparent medusae drift slowly, their umbrella-shaped bodies pulsing with quiet rhythm. Thin sheets of living tissue expand and contract as they move, guiding them through the water with little effort. From beneath the bell, fine tentacles hang like threads, sensitive to the smallest contact. The high water content of these organisms serves several purposes. By matching the density of the surrounding seawater, their bodies achieve a natural buoyancy that requires little energy to maintain. At the same time, the watery composition allows light to pass through their tissues with minimal reflection, reducing the contrast that might reveal them to nearby hunters. In the vast mid-water environment, this near transparency becomes a useful adaptation. Animals searching for prey often rely on detecting shapes or shadows suspended within the water. Gelatinous bodies that transmit most of the light passing through them create very little disturbance in the surrounding brightness. As a result, entire communities of these organisms drift quietly through the ocean, largely unnoticed unless illuminated directly. Under natural conditions, they may pass only a short distance from another animal without being detected at all. Despite their delicate appearance, gelatinous species play a substantial role in marine ecosystems. Many feed actively on plankton, small crustaceans, and other drifting organisms. Their tentacles carry specialized cells that capture prey with remarkable efficiency, transferring the captured food toward the mouth at the center of the body. In turn, these animals become food for a range of predators adapted to handle such soft and watery prey. Certain fish, sea turtles, and other marine creatures include gelatinous organisms in their diets, linking these drifting forms to larger food webs within the ocean. Observations from research vessels sometimes reveal dense gatherings of gelatinous life suspended in the mid-water layers. Within these quiet assemblages, countless transparent bodies drift side by side, each one moving with slow pulses or steady gliding motions. Together they form an unseen landscape of living matter, a population that occupies enormous regions of the ocean while remaining almost invisible to the casual observer. In the dim water, far from shore, the deep sea holds these drifting ghosts in gentle suspension, their nearly weightless forms continuing their silent passage through the vast interior of the sea. There are moments in deep ocean footage when an animal appears to be little more than a faint outline drifting through darkness. Its body seems hollow, as though the creature were made from a thin, transparent shell containing almost nothing at all. Only a narrow structure at the center reveals that life occupies the delicate form. Certain midwater organisms possess bodies so clear that nearly every internal component disappears from view. Muscles remain thin and colorless. Structural tissues form only the lightest scaffolding, and fluids within the body carry almost no pigment. The result is an animal whose shape appears nearly empty, like a fragile envelope of living material surrounding a single visible organ. In many of these species, the most noticeable feature is the digestive system. A slender stomach or intestine often forms the only structure dark enough to interrupt the transparency of the body. Suspended within the clear tissues, this digestive tract traces a gentle curve through the animal, marking the path where captured food will pass. Seen under dim illumination, the creature resembles a drifting vessel carrying a small cargo at its center. The surrounding tissues fade almost completely into the water, leaving the digestive organ as a faint ribbon of color suspended in space. This design appears across several groups of gelatinous animals that inhabit open water environments. Some species of comb jellies, delicate siphonophores, and other soft-bodied organisms share similar anatomical patterns. Their bodies maintain only the minimum structure required for movement and feeding, while most of their volume consists of watery tissues that allow light to pass freely. Within these animals, the digestive system serves as the primary region where visible material accumulates. Prey captured from the surrounding water is broken down within this central chamber, releasing nutrients that spread through fine internal canals. The remaining portions of the body remain nearly transparent because they contain little dense material. At certain moments, the contents of the stomach can briefly reveal the presence of the otherwise invisible animal. After feeding, the digestive tract may fill with the remains of plankton, small crustaceans, or other drifting organisms. These materials carry pigments or structures that contrast with the surrounding transparency. In some cases, the prey itself produces light. Many small marine organisms possess the ability to generate bioluminescence through chemical reactions within their tissues. When such prey is consumed, faint light may continue to glow inside the predator's stomach for a short time. This effect creates an unusual sight in the dark ocean. A creature whose body remains almost entirely invisible may drift quietly, while a soft glow emerges from the center of its digestive tract. The light traces the shape of the stomach, revealing the presence of an animal that would otherwise pass unnoticed through the water. These glowing stomachs do not remain visible for long. As digestion progresses, the luminous chemicals break down and the glow fades gradually. The animal returns to its near invisible state, its body once again blending with the surrounding water. The ability to remain visually subtle offers advantages in environments where shelter is absent and detection depends largely on contrasts in light. By reducing visible structures to the smallest possible area, these animals minimize the signals that predators might perceive from a distance. Yet, the digestive system cannot disappear completely. Feeding remains essential, and the captured energy from prey must travel through some visible pathway inside the body. The result is a form that appears almost empty, carrying within it the quiet machinery of nourishment. Across the midwater layers of the ocean, such creatures continue their silent movements. Transparent tissues surround a single working core, drifting through the vast water column like delicate vessels containing only the faint trace of life within. Each evening, as daylight fades across the ocean surface, a vast movement begins far below. Countless small animals rise slowly through the water column, leaving the deeper layers where they spent the day. Their ascent unfolds quietly, spreading across oceans around the world in a migration so large that it surpasses the movement of any land animals on Earth. This phenomenon is known as the Deal vertical migration. The word Deal refers to the cycle of day and night, and the migration follows that rhythm with remarkable consistency. When darkness approaches the surface waters, enormous populations of marine creatures begin their journey upward, traveling hundreds of meters through the ocean before dawn arrives again. The travelers include an extraordinary variety of life: small fishes, crustaceans, jelly-like organisms, and countless species of plankton participate in this nightly movement. Individually, many are small, sometimes only a few millimeters in length. Yet together, they form a living tide rising through the sea. During daylight hours, these animals remain deeper in the water column, where reduced illumination provides a measure of safety. In brighter layers closer to the surface, predators that rely on sight can easily detect moving shapes. Remaining in darker water during the day reduces the chance of being noticed. As night settles across the ocean, the conditions change. With the fading of sunlight, the upper layers become far less visible. The dim environment allows smaller organisms to travel upward with a lower risk of detection, granting them access to abundant food near the surface. There they find microscopic algae and drifting plankton that grow in the illuminated waters above. These tiny organisms capture energy from sunlight, forming the foundation of marine food webs. For many migrating animals, reaching these feeding grounds each night provides the nourishment necessary for survival. The upward journey unfolds gradually as darkness spreads across the sea. Animals that spent the day resting in deeper layers begin to swim or drift toward shallower water. Some move by steady propulsion, others rise through gentle buoyancy or drifting currents. Within this migrating community, transparency plays a subtle yet important role. Many of the creatures participating in the nightly ascent possess bodies that transmit much of the light passing through them. Their tissues scatter little illumination, allowing them to blend quietly with the surrounding water. In the dim conditions of the night ocean, this transparency helps reduce the visual signals that predators might detect. A body that reflects little light produces only faint outlines against the dark background. When combined with slow movement and careful positioning in the water column, the effect can make the animal difficult to distinguish. Even so, the journey remains filled with risk. Some predators remain active in the upper waters after sunset, waiting for the arrival of the migrating animals. Certain fish patrol these layers with sensitive eyes, capable of detecting the smallest contrasts. Others rely on subtle movements in the water to locate passing prey. The migration continues throughout the night as animals feed among the drifting plankton. In these hours, the upper ocean becomes densely populated with life that was absent during the day. The water column fills with quiet movement as billions of small organisms share the same temporary feeding grounds. Before the first light of dawn reaches the surface, the pattern begins to reverse. The animals slowly descend once more, returning toward deeper layers where daylight will soon spread across the ocean above them. This daily movement forms a steady rhythm within marine ecosystems. Each night, the ocean breathes upward with living travelers, and each morning, the same multitude drifts downward again. Within that immense migration, transparent bodies move quietly through the water, carrying life through one of the largest and most consistent journeys on Earth. In the dim water of the mid-ocean, sight operates under unusual rules. Light arrives only as a faint downward glow, filtered through hundreds of meters of sea. In this subdued environment, even the smallest variation in brightness can reveal the presence of another animal. For predators living here, the ability to notice these subtle differences becomes a powerful advantage. Several species of deep ocean fish possess eyes that appear disproportionately large compared with the rest of their bodies. These organs are shaped by the need to gather as much light as possible from an environment where illumination remains extremely limited. The pupils expand widely, and the internal structures of the eye are arranged to capture faint rays that drift through the water from above. Inside the retina, specialized cells respond to minimal changes in brightness. These photoreceptors allow the fish to detect silhouettes that pass between them and the weak glow descending from distant surface waters. When a drifting organism moves across this dim background, its body interrupts the light for a moment, creating a slight shadow. To a human observer, the difference might seem nearly invisible, yet the eyes of these predators remain tuned to notice such fleeting contrasts. The fish hold their position quietly in the water column, orienting their gaze upward where faint light continues to filter through the ocean. This upward viewing angle proves especially useful in the twilight zone, where many smaller animals travel above their hunters. As those organisms pass through the distant glow, their outlines may appear as delicate shapes against the brighter water overhead. Some predators possess eyes that are tubular in form, extending forward from the head like narrow cylinders. This structure concentrates incoming light along a focused path toward the retina, increasing sensitivity in a particular direction. With such eyes, the fish can scan the water above with remarkable precision. The bodies of these hunters often remain slender and subdued in color, helping them blend into the dim surroundings. Movement tends to be slow and deliberate. Sudden motion might reveal their presence to the very prey they hope to capture. As they hover in the water, their vision remains fixed on the region above. The faint ceiling of light serves as a constant backdrop where passing animals may momentarily appear. Even creatures whose tissues transmit much of the surrounding light can create slight disturbances in that background brightness. A drifting shrimp, a larval fish, or a gelatinous organism moving through the water may cast a subtle shadow when it crosses the dim illumination. The predator's eyes detect this brief interruption and translate it into movement within the dark. Once a potential target becomes visible, the fish adjusts its position with gentle fin strokes. The approach often happens slowly, minimizing vibrations in the water that might alert the prey. As distance closes, the silhouette grows clearer against the faint light above. At the final moment, the predator accelerates with a quick motion of its tail. The jaws open, and the prey disappears into the darkness of the mouth. Within seconds, the water returns to stillness, the faint background glow once again uninterrupted. Such encounters unfold countless times each night throughout the twilight zone. Predators and prey share the same dim environment, each shaped by the delicate balance between visibility and concealment. For the hunters, vision refined to extraordinary sensitivity offers the ability to interpret shadows that drift through the water. For the animals attempting to remain unseen, bodies that transmit light provide a measure of protection. Within this quiet contest, the faintest silhouette can determine the outcome of a meeting in the dim ocean depths. Across much of the ocean, shelter does not exist in the familiar sense. There are no cliffs of stone rising through the water, no forests of branches where small animals can disappear among leaves. Instead, the environment stretches outward as an immense open volume, a space where movement unfolds against the subtle brightness of the surrounding sea. In coastal habitats, creatures often depend on the landscape around them for protection. Fish slip between coral branches, crustaceans tuck themselves beneath stones, and countless small organisms vanish within narrow crevices. The shapes of these environments break up outlines and provide shadows where animals can remain unnoticed. Far from those structured habitats, however, the midwater ocean offers very little physical cover. The water column becomes a broad and continuous space where bodies remain suspended with nothing solid nearby. In such conditions, survival cannot depend on hiding behind objects because there are none. Animals living in these regions must rely instead on their own bodies to reduce the chance of being seen. Camouflage becomes a property of form and material rather than location. The challenge lies in blending with the water itself, an environment that constantly shifts in brightness and color as light travels through it. One approach involves minimizing contrast. A body that reflects little light and carries few pigments produces only faint signals to the eyes of nearby predators. Transparent tissues accomplish this by allowing much of the surrounding light to pass directly through the animal, reducing the outlines that might otherwise reveal its presence. Another strategy relies on reflective surfaces. Some fish possess scales that mirror the surrounding water, scattering light in patterns similar to the environment around them. When viewed from certain angles, these reflective bodies create the illusion that no solid object occupies that space. The shape of an animal can also influence how easily it is detected. Slender bodies present smaller profiles when viewed from below or above, decreasing the shadow cast against the dim illumination of the water column. Smooth contours prevent abrupt edges that might catch a predator's attention. Movement becomes part of camouflage as well. Rapid or erratic motion can draw the eye, even when the body itself remains subtle in color or transparency. Many midwater animals, therefore, swim slowly or drift with currents, matching the gentle motion of the surrounding environment. These adaptations reflect the conditions of an ecosystem where visibility remains one of the most important factors shaping survival. In open water, any object suspended within the column may be noticed if it interrupts the flow of light or casts a distinctive outline. The organisms living there share the same basic challenge. They must eat while avoiding becoming food for something else. Without physical shelter, their bodies themselves become the only means of concealment. Over time, evolution has refined a variety of solutions to this challenge. Transparent shrimp glide through the water with organs barely visible. Gelatinous animals allow light to pass almost completely through their tissues. Fish larvae begin life as delicate forms that resemble fragments of glass drifting in the current. Each of these forms represents a different expression of the same principle. When the environment offers no place to hide, the safest strategy may be to resemble the water itself. Within the quiet expanse of the midwater ocean, camouflage becomes less about blending with objects and more about dissolving into the surrounding light. Bodies take on materials and shapes that reduce their presence in the visual landscape. As animals drift through this immense and open environment, their survival depends on how successfully they merge with the water around them. The ocean contains few walls and no shadows deep enough to conceal every movement. Instead, life adapts by turning invisibility into a living structure carried quietly through the vast interior of the sea. Sunlight enters the ocean in a broad sheet of energy, spreading across the moving surface before slipping beneath the waves. At that boundary, the character of light begins to change. Water does not simply transmit illumination the way air does. Instead, it alters the path, strength, and color of every ray that travels downward. As light penetrates the ocean, it encounters billions of tiny particles suspended within the water. Molecules of salt, microscopic organisms, and drifting fragments of organic matter interact with each passing photon. Some rays are absorbed and converted into heat. Others scatter in different directions, spreading faint brightness through the surrounding water. This process gradually reshapes the light field within the ocean. Rather than moving in straight lines, as it often appears to do in air, underwater illumination becomes diffuse. Rays arrive from many directions at once, reflected and scattered by countless microscopic obstacles. Because of this scattering, objects underwater rarely appear with sharp contrast. Edges soften, colors fade, and brightness spreads more evenly through the environment. The farther light travels through water, the more these effects accumulate, reducing clarity and altering the visual landscape. Reflection plays a central role in determining whether an object becomes visible within this environment. When light encounters a surface, a portion of it bounces away according to the angle and structure of that surface. The reflected rays travel outward and may eventually reach the eyes of another animal. A body that reflects a strong portion of the surrounding light produces a noticeable signal. The returning rays carry information about the object's shape and position, allowing observers to distinguish it from the water around it. Smooth surfaces can produce bright flashes of reflection, while rough textures scatter light in multiple directions. Conversely, a body that allows light to pass through with minimal reflection remains far less noticeable. Transparent tissues reduce the amount of light that returns toward a viewer. Instead of bouncing outward, much of the illumination continues through the material, leaving little evidence that the object exists within the water. This balance between transmission and reflection shapes the visibility of nearly every organism in the ocean. Structures that contain pigments, dense tissues, or internal boundaries reflect more light and therefore appear more distinct. Structures composed mostly of water and delicate membranes interact with light more gently, producing faint signals that blend with the surrounding environment. Another factor influencing underwater visibility is the angle from which light arrives. Much of the illumination in deeper layers travels downward from the surface above. As a result, animals observing the water column often perceive objects as silhouettes when they interrupt the descending light. In such conditions, even transparent organisms may become visible if their bodies alter the path of light in subtle ways. Slight differences in density between tissue and water can bend rays passing through the body, creating faint distortions in the brightness behind it. These distortions remain extremely small, yet sensitive eyes can detect them when scanning the dim background overhead. For this reason, transparency reduces visibility but rarely eliminates it entirely. The physical interaction between light and matter always leaves some trace of the object's presence. The underwater world therefore becomes a delicate interplay between illumination and concealment. Bodies, particles, and surfaces continuously shape the movement of light as it travels through the ocean. Within this shifting field of brightness, visibility depends on how strongly an object reflects, absorbs, or redirects the rays that encounter it. Animals adapted to open water environments gradually evolve forms that interact with light in ways that soften their presence, allowing them to exist within the quiet optical landscape of the sea. Not every living body can fade quietly into the surrounding water. Many animals contain structures that interact with light in ways that make transparency almost impossible to maintain. Even a thin layer of muscle or a small concentration of pigment can transform a nearly invisible form into a clearly defined shape. The difficulty begins with the materials required for complex life. Muscles, bones, and organs must perform specific tasks that often depend on dense tissues and chemical compounds. These structures provide strength, circulation, digestion, and movement, yet each of them alters the path of light passing through the body. Muscle fibers, for example, are built from tightly arranged proteins that contract to produce motion. These fibers possess a texture that scatters light in many directions. When light enters such tissue, the orderly path of the rays breaks apart, creating reflections that reveal the presence of the muscle beneath the surface. Bones create an even stronger effect. The mineral content that gives bone its rigidity also produces surfaces that reflect and absorb light intensely. In animals with solid skeletons, the internal framework forms a series of bright interruptions within the body, casting shadows that can be detected by nearby observers. Blood introduces another challenge. In most animals, circulating blood contains pigments responsible for carrying oxygen through the body. Hemoglobin, the molecule that performs this function in many species, absorbs certain wavelengths of light and reflects others. The result is a visible coloration that spreads through vessels and tissues. Even when the skin or outer layers of an animal remain relatively clear, the presence of blood moving through internal vessels can create visible lines and patches. These patterns change continuously as the heart pumps, producing subtle motion that draws attention to the body. Internal organs also complicate the possibility of transparency. The stomach, liver, and other structures contain dense cellular material needed for processing nutrients and maintaining metabolism. These tissues often differ in color and density from the surrounding body fluids, producing contrasts that interrupt the passage of light. When light encounters these organs, it may be absorbed, reflected, or redirected. The changes create faint silhouettes inside the body, shadows that become noticeable when viewed against the surrounding water. Even slight differences in tissue composition can leave traces that reveal the organism's presence. As animals grow larger and more complex, these internal structures increase in size and number. The digestive system expands to handle greater volumes of food, muscles thicken to support stronger movement, and skeletal elements grow more robust. Each addition contributes further surfaces that interact with light. Because of these requirements, complete transparency becomes increasingly difficult for larger organisms. The biological machinery needed for powerful movement and advanced physiology introduces materials that cannot easily remain invisible. Some species manage partial solutions. Certain fish reduce pigmentation in specific regions of the body, while others position reflective tissues in ways that redirect light away from observers. Yet these adaptations rarely eliminate visibility entirely. The internal systems that sustain life continue to influence how light travels through the body. Smaller or simpler organisms often succeed more easily in maintaining transparency because their tissues remain thin and contain fewer dense components. Gelatinous animals composed largely of water can transmit light with minimal scattering, allowing them to blend more effectively with the surrounding environment. In contrast, animals built from thicker muscles and mineralized structures face a fundamental constraint imposed by physics and biology together. The materials that provide strength, circulation, and metabolic activity inevitably interact with light in ways that reveal their presence. For this reason, transparency appears most often in organisms whose bodies remain delicate and fluid in composition. More complex animals may approach invisibility in certain ways, yet the structures required for their survival ensure that complete transparency remains a rare condition within the diverse forms of life moving through the ocean. Within many animals, the movement of life depends on a fluid that carries oxygen and nutrients through a network of vessels. This fluid, known as blood, supports the constant activity of cells throughout the body. Yet the same substance that sustains life also presents a challenge for creatures that rely on remaining difficult to see. In most vertebrates and many other organisms, blood contains pigments that bind with oxygen molecules. These pigments enable the transport of oxygen from respiratory surfaces to the tissues that require it for metabolism. Hemoglobin, one of the most common of these molecules, contains iron atoms that interact strongly with light. When light enters a body containing hemoglobin-rich blood, certain wavelengths are absorbed while others are reflected outward. The result is the familiar coloration associated with circulating blood. Even when enclosed within vessels, these pigments create visible traces that interrupt the passage of light through surrounding tissues. For animals attempting to maintain transparent bodies, such pigments become a significant obstacle. The network of blood vessels running through muscles and organs can appear as faint branching lines when illuminated. As blood flows through these vessels, the movement of colored fluid adds another layer of visibility. In environments where predators rely on detecting subtle visual contrasts, even small patches of pigmentation may reveal an animal's position. The more extensive the circulatory system becomes, the greater the chance that light interacting with blood will produce visible signals. Some transparent organisms address this challenge by reducing the concentration of pigments within their circulatory fluids. Instead of relying on strongly colored molecules, they use alternative methods to transport oxygen through the body. In certain cases, the fluids remain nearly colorless, allowing light to pass through with fewer interruptions. Other species rely on simple diffusion rather than complex blood circulation. In very small animals, or those with extremely thin tissues, oxygen can move directly from the surrounding water into cells without the need for large networks of vessels. Without heavily pigmented blood flowing through the body, transparency becomes easier to maintain. Among some gelatinous marine organisms, the internal fluids remain so clear that their circulation produces almost no visible contrast. Nutrients and dissolved gases drift through internal channels that blend quietly with the surrounding tissues. Under gentle illumination, the movement of these fluids may remain almost impossible to detect. Even when pigments cannot be eliminated entirely, some animals arrange their circulatory systems in ways that reduce visibility. Blood vessels may lie deeper within the body, shielded by layers of tissue that scatter light before it reaches the colored fluid. In other cases, pigments are concentrated within small regions, rather than spread widely throughout the body. These adjustments allow certain species to preserve a degree of transparency while still maintaining the circulation needed for survival. The balance between physiology and visibility becomes an intricate compromise shaped by the demands of the environment. As bodies grow larger and more active, however, the need for efficient oxygen transport increases. Muscles performing sustained movement require a steady supply of oxygen delivered by specialized molecules in the blood. The greater the demand for energy, the more difficult it becomes to eliminate pigments entirely. For this reason, many of the most transparent animals remain relatively small or possess simplified body structures. Their metabolic needs can be satisfied without the heavy reliance on strongly pigmented circulatory systems found in larger organisms. Within the quiet waters of the mid-ocean, these adaptations allow certain creatures to approach a delicate form of invisibility. By limiting the pigments that normally color blood, they reduce one of the most powerful signals that might otherwise reveal their presence within the surrounding sea. Within the open ocean drift organisms whose bodies seem almost indistinguishable from the water surrounding them. Their forms hold shape only through delicate membranes and faint internal channels, while most of their substance consists of the same fluid that fills the sea itself. These animals appear less like solid creatures and more like gentle rearrangements of water. Many gelatinous marine organisms are built from tissues that contain extraordinary amounts of water, sometimes exceeding 95% of their total mass. What remains is a thin lattice of proteins and cellular structures that provide just enough support to maintain the body's shape. Between these fragile elements, water fills the majority of the internal space. Because the material inside the body closely resembles the surrounding seawater, light travels through it with relatively little disturbance. When rays pass from water outside the animal into the watery tissues within, the transition between the two materials becomes subtle. The light bends only slightly, continuing along its path with minimal reflection. This similarity between body and environment gives gelatinous animals their faint appearance. Instead of presenting dense surfaces that bounce light outward, their tissues allow much of the illumination to pass through them. The body becomes almost transparent, revealing only the most delicate outlines where structural membranes intersect. In species such as certain comb jellies, siphonophores, and pelagic tunicates, the internal architecture remains remarkably simple. Thin layers of living cells form gentle boundaries around compartments filled largely with fluid. Nutrients move through narrow canals, while soft muscular bands contract slowly to guide movement through the water. These animals often glide rather than swim with force. Their motions unfold through slow pulses or subtle contractions that push water through the body. Because the tissues remain light and flexible, the energy required for movement stays relatively small. The high water content also contributes to buoyancy. Bodies composed largely of fluid maintain a density similar to the seawater around them. Instead of sinking rapidly or requiring powerful swimming to remain suspended, gelatinous organisms drift comfortably within the water column. Such buoyancy allows them to inhabit large regions of the midwater ocean without resting on any surface. In these vast spaces, animals built from dense tissues would need greater muscular effort to maintain their position. Gelatinous bodies solve this challenge by becoming almost an extension of the surrounding water. From an optical perspective, this design reduces the number of surfaces that reflect light strongly enough to reveal the animal's presence. The membranes that hold the body together remain extremely thin. When light reaches them, only small portions scatter outward, while most continues through. Even so, complete invisibility remains difficult to achieve. Slight variations in density between tissues and seawater can still bend the path of light just enough to create faint distortions. Observers may notice a delicate shimmer where the body interrupts the background brightness. Inside these watery forms, certain organs remain visible because they contain denser material. Digestive structures, reproductive tissues, or clusters of nerve cells appear as subtle shapes suspended within the clear mass. These components provide the essential functions of life, while the rest of the body maintains its quiet transparency. The result is an organism whose structure resembles a living vessel filled almost entirely with the ocean itself. Water moves through internal passages, muscles ripple gently along flexible walls, and faint organs carry out the processes that sustain the animal. In the dim regions far from shore, such bodies merge gracefully with the optical character of the surrounding sea. Light travels through them almost as easily as it travels through open water, leaving behind only the softest indication that a living form drifts quietly within the immense ocean. At great depths in the ocean, the water presses inward with immense force. Every layer of sea above adds weight, and the pressure increases steadily as depth grows. Animals living in these conditions develop bodies that function perfectly within that surrounding force. Yet those same bodies can become fragile when the pressure changes too quickly. Many transparent organisms that inhabit deep or midwater environments possess tissues that are remarkably delicate. Their structures are built to remain stable within the steady pressure of the ocean around them. The internal fluids, membranes, and channels that maintain their shape depend on that balance between body and environment. When such an animal remains within its natural depth, the pressure surrounding it supports the arrangement of its tissues. The water pressing inward helps maintain the subtle structure of gelatinous bodies and thin membranes. Movement, circulation, and feeding all occur within that stable framework. Difficulties arise when these animals are brought toward the surface. During scientific expeditions, researchers often collect specimens using nets that travel upward through hundreds or thousands of meters of water. As the nets ascend, the pressure surrounding the captured organisms begins to decrease. This reduction occurs rapidly compared with the gradual changes these animals experience in their normal environment. Within minutes, the surrounding pressure may drop to a fraction of what existed at depth. For creatures whose tissues evolved under constant compression, the sudden shift can disrupt the delicate balance that holds their bodies together. Gases dissolved within the body fluids may expand slightly as pressure decreases. Membranes that once remained taut under deep water conditions can lose their structural support. Gelatinous tissues that rely on surrounding pressure to maintain their shape may begin to sag or collapse. In many cases, the animal's form changes before it even reaches the deck of the research vessel. Transparent bodies that once floated gracefully through the midwater environment may arrive at the surface as shapeless masses. Fine structures that supported movement or feeding can disintegrate as the pressure continues to fall. For this reason, scientists studying fragile deep ocean species often rely on observation rather than collection. Modern exploration vehicles, equipped with cameras, allow researchers to view these animals within their natural habitats. The creatures remain intact, drifting through the water exactly as they exist in the deep ocean. Under such conditions, their delicate forms appear far more complex than early specimens once suggested. Transparent tissues reveal networks of internal canals, subtle muscular bands, and fine appendages that cannot survive the journey to the surface. Each structure functions precisely within the pressure regime where the animal evolved. Some species tolerate pressure changes better than others. Organisms with slightly denser tissues or stronger membranes may survive careful collection methods that reduce the rate of ascent. Specialized containers filled with seawater sometimes help preserve the structure of particularly fragile specimens during retrieval. Even with these techniques, many transparent animals remain difficult to study outside their natural environment. Their biology is closely tied to the physical conditions of the deep ocean. Pressure, temperature, and the surrounding water chemistry all contribute to the stability of their bodies. Within their native depths, however, these organisms move with quiet confidence. The same tissues that collapse under rapid pressure changes remain perfectly suited to the environment where they evolved. Membranes stretch lightly, internal channels circulate nutrients, and gentle movements carry the animals through the water. The fragility observed at the surface does not reflect weakness in the ocean below. Instead, it reveals how precisely these creatures are adapted to the conditions surrounding them. In the immense and pressurized interior of the sea, their delicate structures exist in quiet balance with the water that holds them in place. Long before larger animals drifted through the open ocean with nearly invisible bodies, a far smaller community had already discovered the advantage of becoming difficult to see. These pioneers belonged to the vast population of plankton, organisms so small that many remain suspended in the water simply by drifting with the surrounding currents. Plankton include a wide variety of living forms, from microscopic plants that capture sunlight to tiny animals that feed upon them. Some measure only a fraction of a millimeter in length, while others grow large enough to be visible to the human eye. Despite their diversity, many plankton share a similar optical trait that helps them survive in the clear waters of the sea. A large number of planktonic animals possess bodies that transmit light with remarkable ease. Their tissues contain little pigment, and their internal structures remain thin enough that light passes through them with minimal scattering. When viewed within the surrounding water, these organisms appear faint or almost entirely invisible. In the upper ocean, where sunlight penetrates strongly, this transparency offers an important advantage. Small animals drifting near the surface face constant danger from predators searching the water for movement or color. Fish, larvae, small crustaceans, and other planktonic hunters patrol these regions, scanning for prey against the bright background of the sea. For plankton with transparent bodies, the challenge of remaining unnoticed becomes easier to meet. When light travels through their tissues rather than reflecting from them, the organisms produce only subtle disturbances in the surrounding brightness. Their outlines blend quietly with the water column. Many early planktonic crustaceans illustrate this strategy well. Tiny copepods and related species possess bodies that appear almost glass-like when observed under gentle illumination. Their appendages extend outward like delicate threads, while the internal organs remain suspended within the transparent shell. These animals move through the water with small strokes of their swimming limbs, producing barely visible motion. Between bursts of activity, they drift passively, carried by slow currents that distribute plankton throughout the ocean. Other planktonic organisms achieve a similar effect through gelatinous bodies filled largely with fluid. Thin membranes hold their form while allowing light to pass through nearly unhindered. In some species, only the digestive tract or reproductive structures remain visible inside the otherwise clear body. The widespread presence of transparency among plankton suggests that this trait emerged very early in the evolutionary history of open ocean life. Long before larger midwater animals adopted similar strategies, small drifting organisms had already refined the ability to blend with their luminous surroundings. Because plankton occupy the foundation of marine food webs, their adaptations influence many other forms of life. Fish larvae, small shrimp, and gelatinous predators all depend on plankton as a primary food source. In response, these consumers often evolve body designs that mirror the optical properties of their prey. Over time, transparency spreads through different branches of the marine ecosystem, appearing in animals that share the same challenge of surviving within open water. Each lineage develops its own variation on the theme, shaped by the physics of light and the requirements of its body. Within the drifting planktonic community, however, transparency remains one of the oldest solutions. Countless tiny organisms continue to inhabit the ocean with bodies that reveal almost nothing of their presence. Their fragile forms pass through the illuminated layers of the sea like faint disturbances in the water itself. In this quiet world of microscopic life, invisibility becomes a practical form of survival. By allowing light to move freely through their tissues, these small pioneers established a strategy that would later appear again and again among the larger creatures moving through the vast and open ocean. Across the history of life in the ocean, certain solutions appear again and again, emerging in animals that share no close relationship. Bodies shaped by different evolutionary paths sometimes arrive at remarkably similar designs when they face the same environmental pressures. Transparency stands among the clearest examples of this quiet repetition. In the midwater regions of the sea, species from many branches of the animal kingdom have developed tissues that allow light to pass through their bodies. Transparent shrimp, delicate comb jellies, larval fish, drifting tunicates, and fragile octopuses all display variations of this same optical strategy. Yet these animals belong to lineages separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary history. Their ancestors followed very different trajectories through time. Crustaceans evolved from early arthropods whose jointed limbs once explored ancient seas. Jelly-like organisms trace their origins to some of the earliest multicellular animals. Fish developed complex skeletons and muscular bodies capable of powerful swimming. Cephalopods emerged from shelled mollusks that inhabited long-vanished oceans. Despite these differences, many members of these groups now share a similar visual characteristic. Their bodies transmit light with minimal reflection, blending softly with the surrounding water. The repeated appearance of this trait reveals how strongly the conditions of open ocean life influence the shape of living organisms. Biologists describe this pattern as convergent evolution. When unrelated species encounter similar challenges, natural selection may guide them toward comparable solutions. Over generations, features that improve survival and reproduction become more common, gradually shaping the anatomy of the population. In the vast water column, visibility becomes a powerful force shaping these outcomes. Animals drifting far from solid structures cannot hide behind rocks, plants, or the contours of the seafloor. Their only protection lies in how their bodies interact with light. Predators searching for prey rely on detecting movement, contrast, or reflection within the water. A body that reflects strong light may stand out against the surrounding environment. By contrast, tissues that allow illumination to pass through create far less visual disturbance. Because this optical advantage operates across many forms of life, transparency evolves independently in species that share little ancestry. Each lineage arrives at the same broad solution through different biological mechanisms. Some reduce pigments in their tissues, others construct bodies composed largely of fluid. Still others rearrange internal structures to minimize the scattering of light. The result is a collection of animals that appear surprisingly similar in their faintness, even though their internal anatomy remains entirely different. A gelatinous organism may achieve transparency through thin membranes filled with fluid, while a crustacean accomplishes it by reducing color within its shell and tissues. From a distance, both forms may appear equally difficult to detect, yet beneath the surface, their biological architecture reflects completely separate evolutionary histories. Over immense spans of time, the ocean has repeated this experiment countless times. Whenever animals inhabit environments where remaining unseen offers a strong advantage, natural selection gradually favors traits that soften their visual presence. Transparency, therefore, becomes less a singular innovation and more a recurring theme within marine evolution. It emerges whenever the physics of light and the behavior of predators create conditions where blending with water provides a meaningful benefit. Within the open ocean, life continues to explore variations of this same principle. Different organisms arrive at similar appearances through their own pathways, guided by the quiet influence of visibility. Across these diverse creatures, evolution demonstrates a simple but powerful pattern. When the environment rewards invisibility, unrelated animals often discover the same elegant solution, allowing their bodies to fade gently into the light-filled water surrounding them. Even the most transparent body cannot disappear entirely. The ocean may soften the outlines of many creatures, yet certain processes within living organisms inevitably produce traces that light can reveal. Invisibility within water, therefore, remains a delicate balance rather than a perfect disguise. One of the most common interruptions occurs during feeding. When an animal captures prey, the material entering its digestive system often contains pigments, structural fragments, or reflective surfaces that contrast with the surrounding tissues. These substances accumulate inside the stomach where digestion begins, forming visible shapes suspended within an otherwise faint body. For creatures whose tissues transmit light easily, the digestive tract becomes the most noticeable structure. A drifting organism that previously blended smoothly with the water may suddenly display a dark or colored mass within its center. The outline of the stomach grows clearer as food moves through it. In some species, this change remains temporary. As digestion progresses, the visible fragments break down into smaller components that spread through the body's internal channels. Gradually, the sharp contrast fades, and the organism once again appears faint against the surrounding water. Yet during the moments following a successful meal, the animal's presence may become easier to detect. A predator scanning the water for subtle disturbances might notice the darker interior moving gently within a transparent form. Light produced by living organisms introduces another complication. Many animals in the ocean possess the ability to generate bioluminescence, a glow created through chemical reactions within specialized cells. This phenomenon occurs across numerous groups of marine life, from microscopic plankton to larger fish and jelly-like organisms. When bioluminescent creatures are consumed, the light-producing chemicals they contain may remain active for a short time within the predator's digestive system. In such cases, the stomach of the predator begins to emit a faint glow from within. For a body that is otherwise clear, this internal illumination can transform invisibility into visibility. The soft light outlines the digestive tract, turning the animal into a floating lantern within the dark water. The glow may pulse gently as the chemicals continue their reactions before eventually fading. Some species have evolved ways to reduce this risk. Certain gelatinous organisms digest prey rapidly, minimizing the time during which luminous compounds remain active. Others position their stomach deeper within tissues that scatter some of the escaping light. Despite these adaptations, the possibility of internal illumination remains an unavoidable consequence of feeding on bioluminescent prey. The ocean contains countless organisms capable of producing light, and encounters between predator and prey occur constantly throughout the water column. Even without luminous digestion, internal organs can still create subtle shadows. The heart, reproductive structures, and dense clusters of nerve tissue all interact with light in ways that differ from the surrounding transparent materials. As these organs shift position within the body, faint variations in brightness may appear. Such traces rarely remain strong enough to make an animal fully visible. Instead, they create momentary hints of structure, delicate signals that attentive predators may sometimes detect. For creatures living in open water, invisibility, therefore, exists as a dynamic condition rather than a permanent state. Bodies can approach transparency closely, yet internal processes continuously reshape how light moves through them. The act of feeding, the chemistry of digestion, and the presence of light-producing prey all introduce small imperfections into the disguise. Within these subtle limitations, transparent animals continue to drift through the ocean, their bodies nearly unseen but never entirely erased from the luminous environment that surrounds them. High above the deeper layers of the ocean, a faint glow spreads downward through the water column. It is not bright enough to illuminate the sea fully, yet it forms a pale ceiling far overhead. Against that distant brightness, even the smallest interruption can become visible. Many animals living within the open water are aware of this subtle contrast. From below, the dim light filtering through the ocean creates a background that can reveal passing shapes. Creatures drifting between the observer and the glow above may appear as silhouettes, delicate shadows moving slowly across the faint illumination. Predators adapted to these conditions spend long periods watching the water overhead. Their eyes remain oriented upward, scanning the shifting brightness for movements that differ slightly from the surrounding field of light. In this quiet environment, the difference between safety and capture can depend on noticing a shape only slightly darker than the background. For animals attempting to remain hidden, this upward view presents a persistent challenge. Even bodies that allow light to pass through them cannot eliminate every trace of their presence. Slight variations in density, internal organs, or the edges of membranes may alter the path of light just enough to create a subtle outline. As a creature moves across the water column, Its body interrupts some of the illumination traveling downward. The effect may be extremely faint, yet a sensitive eye can recognize the resulting shadow. What appears nearly invisible from the side may stand out when seen against the glow above. This phenomenon shapes the behavior of both predator and prey throughout the midwater environment. Many hunters position themselves beneath the drifting community of animals above them, maintaining a view that turns the dim surface light into a backdrop. By holding this orientation, they transform the ocean into a wide screen upon which silhouettes occasionally appear. The prey species living in these same waters must adapt accordingly. Transparent tissues reduce contrast, yet movement can still betray their location. For this reason, many animals travel slowly or remain suspended in the current for long periods. Gentle motion produces fewer disturbances in the surrounding light. Body orientation also matters. Some organisms align themselves in ways that present the narrowest possible profile when viewed from below. Slender forms minimize the area that blocks light, reducing the strength of the silhouette that might otherwise appear. Even small internal structures can influence visibility in this upward view. A concentrated cluster of organs or a recently filled stomach may create darker patches within the body. When such features pass between a predator and the glow above, they produce localized shadows that stand out against the otherwise faint outline. Over time, natural selection refines these subtle characteristics. Individuals whose bodies scatter less light or cast weaker silhouettes are more likely to avoid detection. Gradually, the populations of many species shift toward forms that interact more gently with the surrounding illumination. Despite these adaptations, the danger of being seen never disappears entirely. The physics of light ensures that any object suspended between an observer and a brighter background can produce a shadow. Transparent bodies may soften the effect, yet they cannot erase it completely. Within the immense water column, countless interactions unfold each night as predators watch the dim ceiling of the ocean for passing forms. A slight darkening in the glow above may signal the presence of prey drifting through the current. In this delicate visual landscape, survival often depends on remaining only slightly less visible than the creatures searching for silhouettes within the faint light of the sea. A faint glow sometimes appears beneath drifting animals in the midwater ocean, so subtle that it blends gently with the dim light descending from far above. At first, the illumination seems almost accidental, a soft radiance leaking from the underside of a body. Yet in many species, this light is produced deliberately, forming part of an intricate strategy shaped by the physics of visibility in open water. Bioluminescence allows certain marine organisms to generate their own light through chemical reactions inside specialized cells. Within these tissues, molecules release energy in the form of faint blue or green illumination when they interact with oxygen and catalytic enzymes. The resulting glow requires little heat and spreads through the surrounding water with remarkable efficiency. While bioluminescence often appears as flashes used for communication or defense, some animals employ it in a far quieter way. Instead of producing bright bursts, they generate a controlled glow along the underside of their bodies. This light serves a purpose closely tied to the subtle illumination filtering downward through the ocean. In the midwater environment, predators frequently watch the water above them. The faint brightness from the surface creates a background against which drifting animals can appear as silhouettes. Even transparent bodies may cast slight shadows when they interrupt the downward traveling light. Counterillumination offers a way to reduce that shadow. By emitting light from the underside of the body, an animal can match the brightness of the faint glow above it. When the intensity of this emitted light closely resembles the surrounding illumination, the silhouette begins to disappear. To an observer positioned below, the animal no longer appears as a dark form against a lighter background. Instead, the light shining from its body fills the shadow that would otherwise reveal its outline. The organism blends into the surrounding field of brightness, becoming far more difficult to detect. Many fish, squid, and small crustaceans possess specialized organs known as photophores that produce this controlled light. These structures often line the underside of the body in precise arrangements. Each photophore contains the chemical components necessary for generating bioluminescence. The animal regulates the brightness of these organs carefully. In deeper layers where the downward light remains extremely faint, only a gentle glow is required to match the surrounding environment. Closer to shallower waters where illumination becomes slightly stronger, the photophores increase their output to maintain the same balance. Some species adjust their light continuously as they move through different depths. Sensors in the eyes detect the brightness of the surrounding water, allowing the nervous system to fine-tune the intensity of the emitted glow. The animal effectively carries its own adjustable lighting system, one that helps it dissolve into the background brightness of the ocean. From a distance, this strategy creates the impression that nothing occupies the space at all. The faint glow from the body merges with the natural illumination passing through the water. Only at close range might an observer notice the delicate points of light arranged beneath the animal. The technique does not produce perfect invisibility. Movement, internal structures, or variations in the surrounding light may still create subtle hints of form. Yet counterillumination reduces one of the strongest visual signals available to predators scanning the water from below. Within the dim layers of the ocean, the interplay between light and shadow becomes a quiet contest of adaptation. Some animals soften their outlines by allowing light to pass through their bodies. Others take a different approach, generating their own illumination to balance the glow descending from above. Through these luminous adjustments, the ocean reveals another way that life adapts to the delicate physics of visibility, shaping bodies that interact with light in ways both subtle and remarkably precise. There are moments in the ocean when the delicate balance of invisibility shifts without warning. A body that once blended quietly with the surrounding water can suddenly become visible, not because the animal has changed, but because the light around it has. Transparency depends on the interaction between a body and the illumination passing through the water. When the brightness of the environment remains stable, tissues that transmit light can soften outlines and reduce contrast. Yet the ocean is rarely constant. Subtle changes in lighting can alter how even the most transparent organism appears. One source of change arrives from above the surface. Clouds passing across the sky can reshape the pattern of sunlight entering the sea. When the brightness of the water column fluctuates, the background against which animals are viewed may shift from moment to moment. A body that once matched the surrounding light may briefly stand out when the illumination grows stronger or weaker. Surface waves also influence how light travels downward. As the water moves, ripples and swells bend incoming rays into shifting patterns. Beams of brightness drift through the ocean in narrow columns that slide slowly across the water column. When one of these brighter paths passes over a drifting animal, the change in illumination can reveal structures that were previously hidden. In shallower regions, reflections from the seafloor may introduce additional sources of light. Sand, coral, or rock surfaces can scatter illumination upward, creating new viewing angles for predators scanning the water. Under these conditions, bodies that once blended into the dim background may produce faint reflections visible from unexpected directions. The angle of observation also plays a role. An organism that appears nearly invisible from one direction may become clearer when viewed from another. Light entering the body can bend differently depending on the observer's position, creating subtle distortions in the surrounding brightness. Water itself is rarely perfectly uniform. Tiny particles drift through the sea, and their presence can alter how light spreads through the environment. When clusters of plankton or suspended sediments pass through the water, they scatter rays in new directions. These changes may briefly increase contrast around nearby animals. Movement can intensify these effects. As an organism shifts position, the path of light through its tissues changes as well. Edges that were once aligned with the surrounding brightness may suddenly intercept stronger rays. For a moment, the outline of the body becomes easier to distinguish. Even internal structures may respond differently under altered lighting conditions. Organs that remained faint under one level of illumination can appear darker when stronger light passes through the body. The contrast between these structures and the surrounding tissues becomes more noticeable. Such moments do not necessarily last long. As waves continue to move and clouds shift across the sky, the lighting of the ocean returns to a different balance. The same body that appeared briefly visible may once again fade into the water as the environment changes. For animals depending on transparency, these fluctuations represent an unavoidable part of life in open water. No adaptation can completely control the conditions of the surrounding sea. Instead, bodies evolve to reduce visibility under most circumstances, accepting that occasional moments of exposure will occur. Within the constantly shifting light of the ocean, invisibility becomes a temporary alignment between body and environment. When the brightness changes, that alignment may dissolve for an instant before forming again. Through this quiet interplay of illumination and movement, the ocean reveals the fragile nature of transparency. Even the most carefully adapted bodies remain part of a world where light is never still. Across the immense span of evolutionary time, the ocean has quietly repeated certain ideas. When similar challenges arise in different corners of life's history, natural selection often guides unrelated creatures toward comparable solutions. Transparency is one of those recurring designs, appearing again and again among animals that share no close ancestry. The pattern emerges across distant branches of the marine family tree. Gelatinous organisms, crustaceans, fish larvae, pelagic snails, and even delicate cephalopods have developed bodies that allow light to pass through them with remarkable ease. These groups differ profoundly in anatomy and origin, yet each has discovered a path toward reduced visibility in the open sea. Long before these forms appeared, the ancestors of many marine animals carried bodies filled with pigments, dense tissues, and reflective surfaces. Those structures worked well in environments where rocks, plants, or seafloor contours offered places to hide. In the vast open water, however, such features could reveal a drifting animal against the surrounding brightness. When individuals possessed slightly clearer tissues or reduced pigmentation, their outlines became more difficult to detect. Predators scanning the water would overlook them more often, allowing these individuals to survive long enough to reproduce. Over generations, subtle changes accumulated, gradually shifting entire populations toward forms that interacted more gently with light. In crustaceans, this transformation often began with the thinning of pigments within the outer shell. Transparent cuticles allowed internal structures to remain faintly visible while reducing strong reflections from the body's surface. In gelatinous organisms, evolution followed a different path, emphasizing bodies composed largely of fluid with delicate membranes that scattered little light. Fish larvae approached the challenge through yet another route. Early developmental stages often begin with tissues that contain minimal coloration. During these periods of life, the body resembles a fragile framework through which light travels freely. Only later, as muscles thicken and pigments appear, does the adult form become more solid in appearance. Each of these pathways reflects a separate experiment conducted by evolution under similar environmental conditions. The ocean provides the same physical constraints for every drifting creature. Light travels downward through the water, predators search for silhouettes, and animals lacking physical shelter must rely on their own bodies for concealment. Over immense stretches of time, countless variations of transparency have arisen within these boundaries. Some species achieve near invisibility through gelatinous tissues filled with seawater. Others retain firmer bodies while minimizing pigmentation and reorganizing internal structures to reduce optical contrast. Even within a single group of animals, multiple versions of this adaptation may appear. Different species develop their own balance between transparency and the structural requirements of life. Certain organs remain visible, muscles maintain the strength needed for movement, and digestive systems continue to process food. Because of these necessities, no transparent organism becomes perfectly invisible. Instead, each species represents a compromise between physiology and concealment. The body must remain functional while also interacting with light in ways that soften its presence within the surrounding water. This repeated process of adaptation reveals how powerfully the environment shapes the forms of living creatures. When visibility becomes a central factor in survival, natural selection returns to the same principle through many separate evolutionary journeys. Within the quiet expanses of the ocean, transparency emerges not as a single invention, but as a recurring theme. Different animals, separated by vast evolutionary distances, arrive independently at bodies that fade gently into the luminous water around them. Through these many experiments, evolution continues to refine the subtle art of invisibility, guided by the steady influence of light traveling through the sea. As bodies grow larger in the ocean, the quiet possibility of transparency begins to fade. The delicate balance that allows small organisms to transmit light becomes harder to maintain when tissues thicken and internal systems multiply. What works for fragile drifting creatures proves far more difficult for animals with greater size and complexity. A small organism may consist of little more than thin layers of tissue surrounding watery interiors. Light entering such a body encounters only a few surfaces capable of scattering it. When those layers remain smooth and lightly pigmented, much of the illumination continues through the organism with only slight distortion. Larger animals require a different architecture. Muscles must grow thicker to generate stronger movement, especially for species that swim actively through the water. These bundles of fibers contain proteins arranged in dense structures designed to contract with force. When light meets these tissues, the organized fibers reflect and scatter it in many directions. The increase in muscle mass introduces numerous microscopic boundaries where light changes direction. Each interface between cells and fibers bends or reflects part of the incoming illumination. As these interactions accumulate across larger volumes of tissue, the body becomes increasingly visible. Skeletal structures add another layer of complexity. Animals that rely on firm internal support often develop bones or cartilage to anchor muscles and maintain shape. These materials possess densities very different from the surrounding tissues. When light encounters such structures, it reflects strongly or becomes absorbed, producing distinct shadows within the body. Circulatory systems also expand with body size. Larger organisms require more efficient transport of oxygen and nutrients, which often involves extensive networks of blood vessels. The fluids flowing through these vessels carry pigments and cells that interact strongly with light. As the circulatory system spreads throughout the body, it creates patterns that interrupt the passage of illumination. Digestive organs grow more complex as well. Larger stomachs, livers, and associated tissues process greater quantities of food and perform specialized metabolic functions. These organs contain dense cellular arrangements that contrast sharply with transparent materials. Even when surrounded by clearer tissues, they produce internal silhouettes visible against the surrounding water. Another challenge arises from the thickness of the body itself. In a thin organism, light may pass through only a short distance before exiting the opposite side. In a larger animal, rays of light must travel through much greater depths of tissue. Along this longer path, they encounter countless opportunities for scattering and absorption. The accumulation of these effects gradually transforms the optical character of the body. Instead of allowing light to pass freely through a simple structure, the animal becomes a complex landscape of surfaces and materials. Each layer contributes additional reflections and distortions that reveal the organism's presence. For this reason, transparency tends to appear most often among small or delicately built animals whose tissues remain thin and fluid. As body plans become more elaborate, the structural requirements of life introduce materials that cannot easily remain invisible. Some larger species approach partial solutions. Certain fish reduce pigmentation in portions of their bodies, while others employ reflective surfaces to scatter light in ways that mimic the surrounding water. Yet these strategies differ from true transparency. They conceal the body by redirecting light rather than allowing it to pass through. Within the vast water column, the relationship between size and visibility reflects a fundamental principle of physics and biology working together. The more intricate a body becomes, the more ways it interacts with light. As a result, the quiet clarity found in smaller drifting creatures rarely extends to larger animals. Their complexity creates an optical presence that even the clearest tissues cannot completely erase. Far below the shifting brightness of the upper ocean lies a realm where conditions differ profoundly from the environments closer to the surface. In these depths, the water remains cold, pressure grows immense, and sunlight never arrives. Life persists here under circumstances that demand unusual solutions, and over time, the deep ocean has become a place where evolution explores possibilities rarely seen elsewhere. The physical forces shaping this environment influence every organism that inhabits it. Pressure increases steadily with depth, compressing water and everything within it. Temperatures remain low, slowing many biological processes. Food drifts downward only in scattered fragments, carried from distant surface ecosystems far above. Within these constraints, animals adapt in ways that reflect both scarcity and stability. The deep sea changes slowly compared with shallower habitats where storms, tides, and seasonal cycles constantly reshape the environment. Because of this stability, evolutionary experiments can unfold gradually across immense spans of time. Some of the most unusual anatomical designs in the animal kingdom have emerged within these quiet depths. Bodies stretch into elongated forms that move with minimal effort through dense water. Eyes enlarge dramatically to capture the faintest traces of illumination. In other species, vision fades altogether, replaced by senses that respond to vibration or chemical signals. Transparency appears among these adaptations as one of many strategies shaped by the unique optical conditions of the midwater ocean. In regions where faint light filters downward but solid structures are absent, bodies that allow light to pass through can reduce visual contrast. Over generations, species occupying these depths refine tissues that interact with illumination in increasingly subtle ways. The deep sea encourages experimentation because its inhabitants face challenges different from those in coastal or surface environments. Limited food supplies reward animals capable of conserving energy. Slow growth and extended lifespans allow evolutionary changes to accumulate gradually within populations. In such settings, unusual body plans may persist long enough to prove their value. A structure that provides even a small advantage in avoiding predators or capturing prey can shape the course of an entire lineage. Over millions of years, these incremental shifts produce forms that appear remarkable when viewed from the perspective of surface ecosystems. Scientists often describe the deep ocean as a natural laboratory for evolution, not in the sense of deliberate design, but as a place where environmental pressures combine to guide biological innovation. Within the stable darkness of these depths, countless species continue to explore different ways of living. Some experiments result in bodies built from fluid and delicate membranes, drifting gently through the water column. Others produce animals equipped with intricate sensory organs, capable of detecting faint movements or chemical traces in the surrounding sea. Still others refine luminous organs that emit controlled light into the darkness. The diversity of these adaptations reflects the many paths that evolution can follow when confronted with extreme conditions. Each species represents a solution shaped by the interaction between its biology and the physical environment around it. Although the deep sea appears remote and quiet, it contains a rich tapestry of life, continuously adjusting to the demands of its habitat. Over geological time, this environment has fostered the emergence of forms that might seem improbable in more familiar settings. Within these vast depths, transparency stands among a collection of strategies developed in response to limited light and open water. It joins a broader pattern of adaptations that reveal how life responds creatively to the challenges imposed by the ocean's most remote regions. The deep sea remains a place where evolutionary processes unfold patiently, shaping organisms whose forms reflect the extraordinary conditions in which they exist. A slow beam of artificial light sometimes moves through the dark ocean, revealing forms that had never been seen by human eyes. The source of that light is not a diver or a net descending from a ship, but a carefully engineered machine drifting quietly through the water. Modern exploration vehicles have begun to open a window into regions of the ocean where fragile life once remained almost entirely hidden. For much of scientific history, the deep ocean could only be studied indirectly. Researchers lowered nets into the water and waited for them to return with whatever organisms had become entangled along the way. This method revealed many species, yet it also left large gaps in understanding. Delicate animals often collapsed during the journey to the surface, losing the structures that defined their living form. The arrival of deep ocean vehicles changed this situation profoundly. Submersibles designed to withstand immense pressure began descending into the water column, carrying scientists directly into the environments where transparent creatures drift. Through thick observation windows and high-resolution cameras, researchers could watch life unfolding in its natural surroundings. Remotely operated vehicles, often called ROVs, expanded these observations even further. Connected to research vessels by long cables, these robotic explorers travel through the depths while operators guide them from control rooms on the surface. Cameras mounted on their frames transmit live images of the underwater world, allowing scientists to examine animals that would otherwise remain invisible. Because these machines move slowly and maintain stable lighting, they can capture details that earlier methods missed entirely. Transparent organisms drifting through the water become visible when illuminated carefully. The soft outlines of their bodies appear on camera, revealing internal organs and delicate appendages that nets could never preserve. Many discoveries of unusual midwater species have emerged from these robotic explorations. Fragile comb jellies glide through the frame with shimmering rows of cilia. Transparent shrimp flick their tails and vanish beyond the beam of light. Gelatinous animals drift past like faint sculptures suspended in the water. Each encounter adds new pieces to the understanding of how life exists in the open ocean. Scientists reviewing these recordings sometimes notice organisms that had never been documented before. Subtle variations in shape, movement, or internal anatomy may indicate entirely new species drifting through the depths. Robotic vehicles also allow researchers to observe behavior rather than only preserved specimens. Cameras record how animals swim, feed, and interact with the surrounding water. These observations reveal patterns that cannot be reconstructed from captured remains alone. Some vehicles carry delicate sampling tools designed to collect organisms without damaging them. Soft suction devices or gentle containers allow fragile animals to be retrieved more carefully than traditional nets once permitted. Even so, many species remain best studied in the place where they live. Advances in imaging technology continue to improve the clarity of these underwater observations. Sensitive cameras can now record faint movements in low-light conditions, capturing details that earlier equipment could not detect. As a result, the drifting inhabitants of the midwater ocean appear more frequently in scientific records. Through these explorations, regions once considered nearly empty are revealed as complex communities of life. Transparent bodies move slowly through the water column, their forms becoming visible only when illuminated by the careful glow of robotic lights. The machines themselves remain silent observers, hovering patiently while the ocean continues its quiet rhythms. Within the view of their cameras, fragile animals glide past, displaying structures and behaviors that had remained hidden for centuries. As exploration continues, these robotic explorers expand the boundaries of what humans can witness beneath the sea. With each descent, they uncover new glimpses of life that had long remained concealed within the vast and dim waters of the deep ocean. Beyond the reach of most instruments and far beneath the routes of ships, the majority of the ocean remains largely unobserved. Even with modern technology, vast regions of the sea have never been viewed directly by human eyes or cameras. The deep ocean stretches across enormous distances, and its quiet interior still holds far more unknown territory than explored ground. The scale of this environment is difficult to imagine. Oceans cover more than 70% of Earth's surface, and the majority of that area descends into deep water far below the reach of sunlight. Within these depths lie immense plains, steep slopes, drifting midwater layers, and trenches that descend deeper than the tallest mountains rise above sea level. Exploration has touched only a small portion of this vast landscape. Research vessels travel limited paths across the surface, launching instruments or vehicles into specific regions chosen for study. Each expedition gathers valuable observations, yet the amount of ocean examined during these missions represents only a tiny fraction of the total. The challenge arises partly from the conditions present in deep water. Immense pressure, cold temperatures, and darkness make exploration technically demanding. Every vehicle descending into these depths must be carefully engineered to withstand forces that would crush ordinary structures. Distance also plays a role. The ocean spans thousands of kilometers across many parts of the planet. Sending vehicles into such remote environments requires extensive preparation, specialized equipment, and long voyages. As a result, scientific exploration often focuses on selected locations rather than continuous coverage. Between those explored areas lie enormous stretches of water that remain unobserved. Within these regions drift countless organisms whose forms and behaviors have never been recorded. Transparent animals moving through the midwater ocean may spend their entire existence beyond the reach of cameras or instruments. The discoveries made during recent decades suggest how much remains hidden. Each time exploration vehicles descend into unfamiliar depths, they frequently encounter species that had never been documented before. Some appear only briefly on camera before drifting away, leaving scientists to study the recorded images for clues about their identity. These encounters reveal a quiet truth about the ocean. Even in places where exploration has occurred before, new organisms continue to appear. The diversity of life within the water column may be far greater than earlier estimates suggested. The midwater regions alone contain vast communities of drifting animals. Because these organisms rarely gather around solid surfaces, they are difficult to locate with traditional mapping techniques. Instead, they move through open water, carried by currents across immense distances. Studying such mobile life requires patience and careful observation. Cameras must search slowly through the water, waiting for faint shapes to emerge within the beam of light. Many animals appear only momentarily before vanishing again into the darkness. Despite these challenges, exploration continues to expand gradually. Each expedition adds new observations to the growing understanding of ocean life. Maps of seafloor terrain become more detailed, and recordings of drifting organisms reveal patterns previously unknown. Yet the proportion of unexplored ocean remains immense. For every region studied in detail, many others remain untouched by scientific investigation. The deep sea therefore retains an element of mystery that few environments on Earth still possess. Within these unseen waters, countless organisms continue their quiet existence. Transparent bodies glide through dim layers of the ocean, interacting with light in subtle ways that conceal them from casual observation. The ocean holds these hidden forms within a realm where exploration has only begun. Beneath the surface of the planet's largest habitat, an enormous world remains waiting to be revealed. In the quiet midwater world, survival rarely depends on speed or strength alone. Many creatures drifting through these depths follow a far subtler path, one shaped not by confrontation, but by disappearance. Their strategy unfolds silently within the physics of water and light, where the simplest way to endure is often to leave almost nothing for the eye to find. Throughout the ocean's dim interior, countless animals share this approach. Bodies formed from delicate tissues allow light to pass through with minimal disturbance, reducing the contrast that might betray their presence. In a place where predators search constantly for the faintest silhouette, this gentle merging with the surrounding water becomes a powerful defense. Transparency represents a quiet negotiation with the environment. Instead of building armor or developing elaborate displays, these animals refine their relationship with light itself. Muscles grow thin and carefully arranged. Pigments remain scarce. Internal structures shift position to minimize the shadows they cast through translucent flesh. Over long spans of evolutionary time, this design has appeared again and again in unrelated groups. Fish larvae drifting near the surface adopt nearly invisible bodies during their earliest stages. Gelatinous animals drifting deeper in the water column maintain forms that resemble the surrounding fluid more than solid tissue. Certain crustaceans develop shells so clear that only the dark points of their eyes reveal their presence. Each lineage arrives at transparency through its own pathway, guided by the same quiet pressures of open water. Predators scan upward toward the faint glow filtering down from above. Prey organisms respond by reducing every feature that might interrupt that soft illumination. Gradually, bodies evolve that scatter almost no light at all. Even so, invisibility in the ocean remains delicate rather than absolute. Digestion can reveal a passing meal through a glowing stomach. Changing light conditions can expose faint outlines. The balance between concealment and exposure shifts constantly with movement, feeding, and depth. Yet the strategy persists because it works often enough. A body that blends into the water column for even a few moments longer may escape a hunting fish or drifting predator. Those small advantages accumulate over generations, shaping species whose forms appear almost unreal to the human eye. For scientists observing these animals through the lens of deep-sea cameras, the effect can be striking. Creatures drift slowly across the frame, barely distinguishable from the surrounding water until subtle details come into focus. A faint digestive tract, a pair of dark eyes, or a delicate lattice of internal tissues may briefly emerge before fading again into transparency. Such encounters hint at how deeply life has adapted to the quiet conditions of the ocean's interior. Here, where solid structures are scarce and light is scarce as well, survival often depends on becoming part of the environment itself. The deep sea continues to reveal these strategies slowly. Each exploration uncovers additional variations on the same elegant solution. Transparent animals appear in places and forms that earlier generations of researchers never expected, suggesting that evolution continues to experiment within this vast and dim habitat. These discoveries carry a gentle reminder about the nature of the ocean. Even after centuries of exploration, the largest living space on Earth still holds immense stretches that remain unseen. Within those waters, organisms shaped by patience and subtlety drift quietly through currents that have flowed for millions of years. Transparency stands among the most graceful adaptations to emerge from this hidden world. It reflects a form of survival built not on dominance, but on harmony with the surrounding environment. In the dim layers beneath the waves, where light thins and shadows soften, life has learned that sometimes the most effective way to endure is simply to become almost invisible.